The golden sun cast long shadows across the Montana prairie as Clara Reynolds stood frozen at the altar, her white gown billowing in the spring breeze of 1875, staring in disbelief at the empty space where her fiancé should have been standing. The letter in the preacher's trembling hands said it all. Thomas Blackwell had fled with her dowry and her family's savings, leaving her to face 300 wedding guests alone. "I'm sorry, Miss Reynolds," Reverend Johnson whispered, the pity in his eyes almost worse than the humiliation burning through her veins. Clara could feel the weight of every stare pressing against her back, hear the murmurs rippling through the crowd gathered outside the little white church of Silver Creek. Her father's face had gone ashen, her mother was openly weeping, and Clara's hands began to shake so violently that the small bouquet of wildflowers she'd gathered that morning scattered across the wooden platform. "I believe I might have a solution," came a deep voice from the back of the gathering. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, and through this human corridor strode a tall figure Clara had seen only in passing during her 3 years in Silver Creek. Noah Hayes, owner of the Hayes cattle ranch that bordered her father's struggling farm. He moved with the easy confidence of a man who spent his days in the saddle, his dark hat clutched respectfully in his hands, revealing hair the color of sun-bleached wheat. "Mr. Hayes," Reverend Johnson acknowledged with surprise. "What brings you to town today?" "I came to pay my respects," Noah said, his eyes never leaving Clara's face as he continued his steady approach. "But it seems I've arrived at an unfortunate moment." Clara felt her cheeks burn with shame. Of course, the wealthiest rancher in the county would witness her disgrace. She straightened her spine, determined not to collapse under the weight of her humiliation. "Mr. Hayes, this is hardly the time for," her father began, but Noah raised a hand, silencing him with the quiet authority that had built his empire from nothing. "Miss Reynolds," Noah said as he reached the altar steps, his voice low enough that only she, the Reverend, and her parents could hear. "I don't pretend to understand what's happened here today, but I do know that a woman of your character doesn't deserve such treatment." Clara found her voice at last. "You know nothing of my character, Mr. Hayes." A smile touched the corner of his mouth. "I know more than you might think. I've watched you help your father in the fields when most women would consider it beneath them. I've seen you teach the children at Sunday school with patience I certainly don't possess. And I know that any man who would abandon you is a fool of the highest order." Before Clara could respond, he turned to address her father. "Mr. Reynolds, I understand you're facing financial difficulties that will only worsen after today's events." Her father's face crumpled with shame. "Thomas took everything, the money for the farm equipment, our savings, everything." Noah nodded solemnly before turning back to Clara. "Miss Reynolds, I have a proposition that might solve several problems at once." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "I find myself in need of a wife to help manage my household, and you find yourself in need of, well, a groom." Clara's jaw dropped. "Mr. Hayes, you can't possibly be suggesting a marriage of convenience," he finished for her. "Your father's farm adjoins my ranch. I've been trying to buy that land for years. I'll clear your family's debts, ensure they keep their home, and you'll have the protection of my name." "This is madness," Clara whispered, though a tiny part of her mind was already calculating what this could mean for her family's future. Noah Hayes held out his hand, palm up. "Perhaps it is. But sometimes madness is preferable to ruin." Clara stared at his outstretched hand, calloused from years of hard work. The silence stretched between them as 300 people held their collective breath. "Why would you do this?" she finally asked. His blue eyes, the color of a summer sky, held her steadily. "Because I believe in helping neighbors in need. Because your father's land would complete my northern pasture. Because no woman should be humiliated this way." He paused. "And because I've admired you from afar for longer than is probably proper to admit." Clara's mother gasped softly behind her. "You don't have to answer now," Noah continued. "But the Reverend is here, the guests are assembled, and I'm offering you a way to walk out of this church today with your head held high." Clara looked back at her parents, her mother's tear-stained face, her father's defeated posture. She thought of the crushing debt that would now fall on them, the farm they would surely lose, the whispers that would follow her family through town for years to come. She turned back to Noah Hayes, studying his face for any sign of mockery or deceit, but found only steady patience and something else she couldn't quite name. "If we do this," she said slowly, "it would be a business arrangement only." "Of course," he replied, though something flickered in his eyes. "You'll have your own room at the ranch house, and I'll expect only that you help manage the household staff and occasionally host dinners for business associates. In return, your family's debts will be paid, and they'll retain ownership of their land with a generous lease agreement from my ranch for partial use." Clara took a deep breath, aware of the murmurs growing louder behind her. This man was nearly a stranger, yet here she stood, considering binding herself to him for life to save her family from ruin. "You'll treat me with respect?" she asked quietly. "Always," he answered without hesitation. Clara looked to the Reverend, who seemed as shocked as anyone, then back to Noah Hayes and his still outstretched hand. "Then yes, Mr. Hayes," she said, placing her trembling fingers in his palm, "I accept your proposition." A ripple of astonishment swept through the crowd as Noah stepped up to take his place beside her at the altar. Clara couldn't quite believe what was happening as the Reverend, after a moment's hesitation, began the ceremony anew. When Noah slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, where had he even gotten a ring? And the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Clara felt as though she were floating outside her body, watching someone else's life unfold. "Mrs. Hayes," Noah said softly, offering his arm, "shall we?" Clara placed her hand in the crook of his elbow, feeling the solid strength beneath his black suit jacket. As they turned to face the crowd, she caught Thomas's best friend staring open-mouthed at the back of the gathering. The realization hit her suddenly. Thomas must have sent him to witness her humiliation. Instead, he would report back that Clara Reynolds had married the wealthiest rancher in the county less than 10 minutes after being jilted. The thought gave her enough courage to lift her chin and walk down the aisle on her new husband's arm, ignoring the whispers and stares that followed them out into the bright Montana sunshine. Noah led her to a handsome black carriage with the Hayes brand emblazoned on the side. He helped her inside with gentle hands before turning to her parents, who had followed them out in a daze. "Mr. and Mrs. Reynolds, I'll have my men bring your daughter's belongings to the ranch this evening. You're welcome to visit whenever you wish, of course." Clara's mother stepped forward, tears still streaming down her face. "Mr. Hayes, I don't know how to thank you for what you've done today." "There's no need for thanks, madam. I've gained far more than I've given." His eyes flicked to Clara, who sat stiffly in the carriage, still struggling to process the day's events. "Now, if you'll excuse us, I believe my wife and I have much to discuss." With that, he climbed into the carriage beside Clara and took up the reins. As they pulled away from the church, Clara finally found her voice again. "I don't understand any of this," she said quietly. "Why would you tie yourself to a woman you barely know?" Noah kept his eyes on the road ahead as the carriage rolled down Silver Creek's main street, past gawking townspeople and the general store where Thomas had worked as a clerk. "I've been watching you for 3 years, Miss Reynolds, Mrs. Hayes," he corrected himself. "I know more about you than you might think." "That's hardly reassuring," Clara replied, clutching her bouquet stems now bereft of flowers. A small smile curved his lips. "Fair enough. Let's start with what you know about me then." Clara considered this as they left the town behind, the road leading west toward the sprawling Hayes Ranch. "You came to Silver Creek 5 years ago. You bought Old Man Peterson's failing cattle operation and turned it into the most successful ranch in the territory. You employ half the men in the county, and you've never lost a herd to rustlers or bad weather." She paused. "People say you're fair but demanding." "An accurate assessment," Noah acknowledged. "What else? You're unmarried, obviously. At least you were until about 10 minutes ago. You don't come to town often, and when you do, you keep to yourself. The ladies' auxiliary has been trying to match you with every eligible woman in 3 counties. This drew a genuine laugh from him, the sound deep and warm. "Also true, is that all?" Clara shifted uncomfortably on the leather seat. They say you were some kind of war hero during the conflict, but you never speak of it. Noah's hands tightened slightly on the reins, but his expression remained neutral. Not a hero, just a man who did what was necessary. He glanced at her. Anything else? You outbid the mining company when they tried to buy my father's water rights last summer, she said softly. He never understood why you paid so much. The mining operation would have poisoned the creek that runs through both our properties, Noah replied matter-of-factly. I was protecting my investment. And now you've acquired a wife to protect your investment as well. Clara couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. Noah pulled the carriage to a stop, turning to face her fully. Mrs. Hayes, Clara, I meant what I said at the church. This arrangement benefits us both. Your family keeps their land and dignity, and I gain. He hesitated. What do you gain, Mr. Hayes? Clara pressed. His blue eyes held her steadily. A partner, someone to share the burden of running a ranch that's grown too large for one man to manage alone. You could have hired a housekeeper, Clara pointed out. A housekeeper can't host dinner for the cattle buyers from Chicago or help me navigate the social obligations that come with my position, Noah responded. And a housekeeper wouldn't have given me the opportunity to thwart whatever scheme your former fiancé had planned. Clara's eyes widened. What do you mean? Noah sighed, taking up the reins again and clicking to the horses. Thomas Blackwell has been asking questions about my operation for months. Too many questions. I suspect he was planning to use your family's farm as a base for rustling my cattle across the Canadian border. That's ridiculous, Clara protested. Thomas is many things, apparently, but he's not a criminal. Time will tell, Noah said cryptically as the carriage crested a hill, revealing the Hayes Ranch spread out below them. Clara's retort died on her lips as she took in the sight. A large, two-story ranch house of sturdy timber stood proudly at the center of a compound that included a bunkhouse, stables, barns, and various outbuildings. Beyond stretched fenced pastures dotted with grazing cattle, the herds extending as far as she could see. Welcome home, Mrs. Hayes, Noah said quietly, watching her reaction. Clara swallowed hard, suddenly overwhelmed by the reality of her new situation. It's impressive. It's a work in progress, he replied, guiding the carriage down the slope toward the main house. Much like our arrangement will be. As they approached, Clara noticed a flurry of activity ranch hands pausing in their work to stare, a woman hurrying out onto the front porch of the main house, wiping her hands on her apron. Word travels fast, Clara murmured. One of my men was in town and likely rode ahead, Noah explained as he brought the carriage to a halt in front of the house. Mrs. Winters, he called to the woman on the porch, we have a new mistress of Hayes Ranch. The plump, gray-haired woman's mouth fell open as she looked from Noah to Clara and back again. Mr. Hayes, but you left this morning to check on the north pasture. Plans change, Mrs. Winters, Noah said smoothly, jumping down from the carriage and coming around to help Clara descend. May I present my wife, Mrs. Clara Hayes? Clara felt her cheeks burning as the housekeeper's eyes widened even further. Your wife, Mrs. Winters repeated incredulously. As of an hour ago, Noah confirmed, his hand firmly supporting Clara's elbow. Please prepare the mistress's room and have a bath drawn. Mrs. Hayes has had quite a day. Of course, Mr. Hayes, Mrs. Winters managed, curtsying awkwardly before hurrying back inside, presumably to share the shocking news with the rest of the staff. They're going to think I trapped you somehow, Clara whispered as Noah led her up the porch steps. Let them think what they will, he replied. Within a week, they'll be too busy with their duties to gossip. The interior of the ranch house was surprisingly refined, with polished wooden floors, quality furniture, and tasteful decorations that spoke of wealth without ostentation. Clara took it all in silently as Noah guided her through the main floor, introducing her to startled staff members they encountered along the way. This will be your domain to manage as you see fit, he explained as they completed the tour in a light-filled sitting room at the back of the house. Mrs. Winters has been attempting to serve as housekeeper, cook, and ranch manager's wife all at once, which is more than any woman should handle. I'm sure she'll be grateful for your assistance once she recovers from the shock. Clara sank into a comfortable chair, suddenly exhausted. Mr. Hayes Noah, he corrected gently. If we're to convince everyone this is a real marriage, you should use my given name, at least in public. Noah, she amended, the name feeling strange on her tongue. I'm not sure I know how to be the mistress of a ranch this size. My parents' farm is modest, to say the least. He took the seat across from her, removing his hat and placing it on the table between them. You'll learn, and until you do, Mrs. Winters will guide you. I don't expect perfection, Clara, just your best effort. The sincerity in his voice was unexpected, and Clara found herself studying his face more carefully than she had before. Noah Hayes was handsome in a rugged way, with lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of long days in the sun, and a small scar near his right temple that disappeared into his hairline. There was a stillness to him, a self-contained quality that made him difficult to read. "And what will you expect of me as a wife?" she asked quietly, forcing herself to meet his gaze. His expression remained impassive. "As I said at the church, this is a business arrangement. I expect you to manage the household, host guests when necessary, and present yourself as my wife to the outside world. Beyond that, your time is your own. And, at night," Clara forced herself to ask, heat rising in her cheeks. Noah's eyes softened slightly. "You'll have your own room, Clara. I gave my word that I would treat you with respect, and I mean to keep it." Relief washed through her, followed almost immediately by an unexpected twinge of something else she couldn't quite identify. "Thank you," she said simply. He rose to his feet. "You must be exhausted, Mrs. Winters will have your bath ready by now. We can discuss the details of our arrangement further tomorrow after you've had time to rest." Clara stood as well, smoothing the wrinkles from her wedding gown, the gown she'd sewn by hand over the course of 3 months, dreaming of a very different wedding day than the one she'd experienced. "One last thing," Noah said, pausing at the doorway. "Whatever else happens, I want you to know that I meant what I said. Thomas Blackwell is a fool for letting you go." Before Clara could respond, he turned and left, his footsteps echoing down the hallway, leaving her alone with her thoughts in what was now her home, Clara's first week as Mrs. Noah Hayes passed in a blur of introductions, explanations, and adjustments. Her personal belongings arrived from her parents' farm, along with a tear-stained note from her mother expressing equal parts gratitude to Noah and concern for Clara. News of their sudden marriage spread quickly throughout the county, accompanied by wild speculation about the circumstances. Noah proved to be exactly what he'd claimed: respectful, fair, and largely absent. He rose before dawn each day to work with his men, returning only for the evening meal, which they took together in stilted politeness before he retreated to his study to manage the ranch's accounts. Clara, meanwhile, threw herself into learning the workings of the household. Mrs. Winters, after recovering from her initial shock, proved to be a patient teacher, guiding Clara through the complexities of managing a staff that included a cook, 2 maids, a stable boy, and a rotating cast of cowboys who came and went from the bunkhouse. On the 7th day of her marriage, Clara was in the kitchen garden, harvesting vegetables for the evening meal when she heard the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Looking up, she saw a lone rider approaching from the direction of town. As he drew closer, she recognized her father's stooped shoulders and felt a rush of warmth at the familiar sight. "Papa," she called, setting down her basket and wiping her hands on her apron as she hurried to meet him. Charles Reynolds dismounted stiffly, his weathered face breaking into a smile as Clara embraced him. "There's my girl," he said, patting her back awkwardly. "Your mother's been fretting something awful, wondering how you're settling in." "I'm fine, Papa," Clara assured him, leading him toward the house. "Everyone has been very kind." Her father glanced around at the prosperous ranch with ill-concealed awe. "It's something, isn't it? Hard to believe my little girl is mistress of all this now." Clara felt a pang at the wonder in his voice. "It's just a bigger house with more mouths to feed," she said lightly. "How are things at home?" Her father's expression darkened. "That's partly why I've come. There's been talk in town." Thomas was seen yesterday in Billings, boasting about some big cattle deal he's making. Clara's stomach clenched. What kind of deal? Nobody knows for certain, but Clara, her father hesitated. The sheriff found tracks of a large herd being moved north across your husband's land 3 nights ago, cattle that weren't his. Rustlers? Clara asked, though she already suspected the answer. Her father nodded grimly. And the word is they're planning something bigger, much bigger. Clara thought of Noah's suspicions about Thomas, which she had dismissed. Have you told Mr. Hayes about this? Came straight here, didn't I? Her father looked uncomfortable. Clara, there's something else you should know. Before your wedding day, Thomas was asking all sorts of questions about Hayes Ranch where the cattle were grazing, how many men guarded them at night, which trails led to the northern border. Clara felt cold despite the warm spring day. You think he's involved with the rustlers? I think, her father said carefully, that your new husband might have saved you from more than just humiliation. Before Clara could respond, the sound of galloping horses interrupted them. Noah appeared on the ridge above the ranch house, accompanied by 3 of his ranch hands. Even from a distance, Clara could see the tension in his posture as he spotted her father's horse. Mr. Reynolds, Noah greeted as he dismounted, his expression guarded. This is an unexpected pleasure. Mr. Hayes, her father nodded respectfully. I've come with news I thought you should hear directly. Noah's eyes flicked to Clara, then back to her father. Let's continue this conversation inside. In Noah's study, Clara listened with growing alarm as her father repeated what he'd heard in town, adding details he hadn't shared with her about Thomas's suspicious activities in the weeks before the wedding. He kept asking about your cattle drives, your grazing patterns, Charles explained. At the time, I thought he was just taking an interest in ranching because of Clara, but now… Noah's face remained impassive, but Clara noticed his hands tightening on the edge of his desk. Did he mention any names, associates he might be working with? Her father shook his head. Not to me. But he was spending time with some rough characters at the saloon, men nobody recognized from around these parts. Noah exchanged a significant look with his foreman, who had joined them for the discussion. Wilson, double the night guards on the north and east ranges. No man rides alone until further notice. Yes, sir, Wilson replied, touching his hat before departing. Mr. Reynolds, I appreciate you bringing this information directly to me, Noah said, his tone formal but sincere. It confirms what we've suspected for some time. I couldn't stand by while the man who did right by my daughter was robbed blind, Charles replied with simple dignity. Clara's mother and I are in your debt, Mr. Hayes. Noah's expression softened slightly. There is no debt between family, sir. The word family hung in the air between them, a reminder of the strange circumstances that now bound their lives together. Clara's father cleared his throat, clearly moved by Noah's statement. Well, I should be getting back before dark, he said, rising from his chair. Clara's mother will be wanting a full report on how our girl is faring. You'll stay for dinner, Noah said, in a tone that brooked no argument. And I insist you take one of my men with you for the ride home. If Blackwell is involved with rustlers, it's not safe for anyone connected to this ranch to travel alone. After seeing her father off with one of the ranch hands as escort, Clara found Noah in the barn, checking the tack on his favorite stallion, a magnificent black animal with a white star on its forehead. You're going after them, she stated, not bothering with preliminaries. Noah didn't look up from his work. I'm going to patrol our northern boundary. We've lost 30 head in the past month, small enough numbers that it could be blamed on strays, but too consistent to be coincidence. And you think Thomas is behind it. Now he did look at her, his blue eyes serious in the dim light of the barn. I know he is. The question is who he's working with and how big an operation they're planning. Clara wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warm evening. I can't believe I was so blind. That I nearly married a cattle thief. You couldn't have known, Noah said, his voice gentler than she'd ever heard it. Men like Blackwell are skilled at deception. I should have seen it, she insisted. All those questions about your ranch, his sudden interest in the northern trails. She shook her head, disgusted with herself. I thought he was taking an interest in my life, in the things that mattered to my family. Instead, he was using me. Noah abandoned his tack and crossed to where she stood, stopping just short of touching her. Clara, look at me. She raised her eyes reluctantly to meet his. You are not responsible for Thomas Blackwell's crimes, he said firmly. You are his victim, not his accomplice. Something in his unwavering gaze broke through the wall of shame Clara had been building around herself. I keep thinking about what would have happened if we had married, if he had used my father's farm as a base for his operations. Her voice cracked slightly. My parents could have lost everything: their farm, their reputation, even their freedom if they were implicated. But they didn't, Noah reminded her. And they won't. Whatever Blackwell planned, it's been disrupted by our marriage. The words hung between them, a reminder of the strange bond they now shared, neither love match nor completely businesslike, but something undefined and evolving. When will you return? Clara asked, changing the subject. Before dawn, if all goes well, Noah replied, turning back to his horse. I'll have 2 men watching the house while I'm gone. Stay inside after dark. Clara nodded, then hesitated. Be careful, she said finally. The men my father described, they sound dangerous. Noah gave her a small smile that transformed his serious face. I've faced worse, Mrs. Hayes. Something in his tone made Clara wonder again about his past, about the war experiences he never discussed. Even so, she said, I would prefer my husband return without additional scars. His smile widened fractionally. I'll do my best to accommodate your preference. As he mounted his horse and rode out with 4 of his most trusted men, Clara stood in the yard watching until they disappeared into the gathering dusk. Only then did she acknowledge the fear that had been building inside her since her father's visit, not just fear for Noah's safety, but fear that Thomas might seek some form of revenge against her as well. That night, Clara struggled to sleep, listening to every creak and groan of the unfamiliar house. Around midnight, she abandoned the attempt altogether and moved to the window seat in her bedroom, wrapping a quilt around her shoulders as she stared out at the moonlit pastures. She must have dozed off eventually, because she woke with a start to the sound of horses approaching in the pre-dawn light. Rushing to the window, she saw Noah dismounting in the yard below, issuing quiet orders to his men. Even from a distance, she could see the weariness in his movements, the way he favored his right side as he handed the reins to a stable boy. Without stopping to think, Clara threw on a robe over her nightgown and hurried downstairs, reaching the kitchen just as Noah entered through the back door. You're hurt, she said immediately, taking in the torn sleeve of his shirt and the dried blood on his forearm. Noah looked surprised to see her. It's nothing. A branch caught me as we were riding through the timber. His eyes narrowed as he took in her disheveled appearance. Have you slept at all? Enough, Clara lied, moving to the stove to stoke the fire. Sit down, I'll make coffee and see to that arm. To her surprise, Noah complied without argument, sinking into a kitchen chair with a barely suppressed groan. Clara busied herself with the coffee pot, then retrieved the medicine box Mrs. Winters kept in the pantry. Did you find anything? She asked as she set a steaming cup in front of him. Noah took a long drink before answering. Signs of a large herd being moved north, just as your father said. We followed the trail to the ridge above Cottonwood Creek, but lost it in the rocky terrain. Clara dampened a clean cloth and gently began cleaning the long scratch on his forearm. How many cattle? 50, maybe more, Noah replied, watching her work with an unreadable expression. Too many to be an opportunistic theft. This was planned. Clara applied a salve to the wound, her fingers light against his sun-bronzed skin. Will they try again? Without doubt. The spring cattle drive to Billings starts in 3 days, over 2,000 head moving across open country. His jaw tightened. It's the perfect opportunity for a large-scale theft. Clara began wrapping a bandage around his arm, acutely aware of the solid strength beneath her fingers, the warmth of his skin. What will you do? Change the route, double the guards, set a trap if necessary. He winced slightly as she secured the bandage. Thank you. Clara stepped back, suddenly self-conscious in her nightclothes. You should get some rest before the day begins. Noah nodded, finishing his coffee in one long swallow before standing. He paused at the door, looking back at her with an expression she couldn't interpret. "Clara, thank you for waiting up." Before she could respond that she hadn't intentionally waited for him, he was gone, his footsteps echoing up the stairs to his bedroom at the opposite end of the hallway from hers. Clara remained in the kitchen as the dawn light strengthened, thinking about the man she had married. A man who had taken her hand at the altar for reasons she still didn't fully understand, who treated her with unfailing courtesy while keeping his own thoughts and feelings carefully guarded. A man who was now risking his life to protect not just his own property, but the livelihoods of everyone who depended on Hayes' ranch. For the first time since their hasty wedding, Clara wondered if there might eventually be more between them than a mere business arrangement. The next 2 days passed in a flurry of activity as the ranch prepared for the spring cattle drive. Noah spent most of his time with the men, planning the new route and organizing additional security measures. Clara, determined to be useful, took over management of the supplies for the drive, working with the cook to prepare provisions that would sustain 20 cowboys and 2,000 cattle on their journey to the railhead at Billings. On the eve of the drive, Noah called the entire ranch staff together in the main yard. Clara stood at his side, trying to project a confidence she didn't feel as she faced the sea of weathered faces. "As most of you know, we've had trouble with rustlers on our northern boundary," Noah began without preamble. "Tomorrow's drive presents a tempting target for them, which is why we've altered our route. Instead of taking the usual trail through Cottonwood Pass, we'll move the herd south through Reynolds Valley and approach Billings from the east." A murmur ran through the assembled cowboys. The southern route was longer and more difficult, requiring an extra 3 days on the trail. "I know it's not ideal," Noah continued, "but it gives us an advantage. The rustlers are expecting us to take the northern route. By the time they realize we've changed course, we'll be well on our way to Billings." "What if they're watching the ranch, boss?" one of the older hands called out. "They'll see which way we head out," Noah nodded, having clearly anticipated the question. "That's why we'll start driving the herd north as usual. Once we're out of sight of the ranch, we'll double back through broken timber and head south. Wilson and I have already scouted the route." He continued outlining the plan, assigning positions and responsibilities with the efficiency of a military commander. Clara watched the men's faces as they listened, noting the respect in their eyes as they looked at her husband. These men would follow Noah Hayes anywhere, she realized. They trusted him completely. As the meeting broke up, the ranch hands dispersing to make their final preparations, Noah turned to Clara. "I'll be leaving Wilson in charge of the ranch while I'm gone. If there's any trouble, he'll make sure you're safe." Clara frowned. "You're going with the drive." "I thought the foreman usually led it." "Normally, yes, but with the threat of rustlers, I need to be there." His expression softened slightly at her evident concern. "I've done this many times, Clara. I'll be back in 2 weeks. 2 weeks." It shouldn't matter, they had barely begun to know each other in the 3 weeks since their wedding, and yet Clara found herself unexpectedly distressed at the thought of his absence. "Of course," she said, keeping her voice even. "I'll have everything ready for your departure at first light." Noah studied her face for a moment, as if trying to read something in her expression. "There's something else you should know," he said finally. "I've asked the sheriff to keep an eye on the ranch while I'm gone. After what your father told us about Blackwell's questions, I'm concerned he might try to retaliate against you personally." Clara's stomach clenched at the thought, but she kept her features composed. "I can take care of myself, Noah." "I don't doubt it," he replied with the ghost of a smile. "But humor me. Stay close to the house and keep my rifle in your room at night." Before Clara could argue, Mrs. Winters called her away to deal with a crisis in the kitchen, leaving her with no choice but to nod her agreement as she hurried off. That night, as Clara packed the last of the provisions for the drive, she found herself lingering over the task, double-checking supplies that had already been verified, delaying the moment when she would have to return to her empty bedroom and face the knowledge that Noah would be gone with the dawn. "You should be sleeping," came his voice from the doorway of the supply room. Tomorrow will come early enough. Clara looked up, startled to find him watching her with that same unreadable expression he often wore in her presence. I wanted to make sure everything was perfect. It is, he assured her, stepping into the room. You've done more in 3 weeks than most women would manage in 3 months. The unexpected praise warmed her. I've had excellent guidance from Mrs. Winters. It's more than that, Noah said, moving closer. You have a natural talent for organization and management. The men have noticed. Wilson says the supplies for this drive are the most efficiently packed he's seen in 10 years on this ranch. Clara felt herself blush, unused to such direct compliments. Thank you. Noah hesitated, then reached into his pocket. I have something for you. I meant to give it to you earlier, but the timing never seemed right. He held out a small object that gleamed in the lamplight, a key on a simple silver chain. What is this? Clara asked, taking it carefully. The key to my study, Noah explained. While I'm gone, you'll need access to the ranch accounts, the mail, any business that can't wait for my return. Clara stared at the key in her palm. It was a small thing, objectively speaking, but the trust it represented was enormous. Noah, I don't know the first thing about ranch accounts. The ledgers are clearly marked, and I've left instructions in the top desk drawer. He paused. I trust you, Clara. More than that, I respect your intelligence and judgment. She looked up at him, truly surprised. You hardly know me. Something flickered in his eyes, amusement, perhaps, or something warmer. I know enough. He gently closed her fingers over the key. Wear it. The chain is long enough to hide beneath your collar if you prefer. Clara slipped the chain over her head, the key coming to rest just below her collarbone. It was warm from his pocket, and the weight of it against her skin felt strangely intimate. I should let you finish here, Noah said, stepping back. We leave at first light. I'll be up to see you off, Clara promised. He nodded, turning to go, then paused in the doorway. Clara, yes, for a moment he seemed on the verge of saying something significant, but then his expression shuddered. Sleep well, he said instead, and was gone. Clara touched the key at her throat. Wondering at the strange sense of connection she felt to this man who was still, in many ways, a mystery to her. True to her word, Clara rose before dawn to oversee the final preparations for the cattle drive. The yard was organized chaos as cowboys loaded supplies, checked tack, and prepared for the long journey ahead. Noah moved through it all with calm authority, solving problems and answering questions with the ease of long experience. Clara had coffee and biscuits waiting when he finally came in for a hasty breakfast, his saddlebags already packed and waiting by the door. The men say the weather should hold clear for at least the first week, she commented, pouring his coffee. That's fortunate, Noah nodded, eating quickly. The southern route has better water access anyway, which will help if we do hit rain later in the drive. They lapsed into silence, the ticking of the kitchen clock marking the minutes until his departure. Clara wanted to say something meaningful, but found herself suddenly shy, unsure of what was appropriate in their unusual relationship. I've left letters for my business associates in Billings on my desk, Noah said finally, breaking the silence. If any of them come calling while I'm gone, you can provide them with the information they need. Of course, Clara replied, glad to focus on practical matters. Is there anything else I should know? Wilson knows where to find me on the trail if there's an emergency, Noah said, draining his coffee cup and standing. Otherwise, I'll see you in 2 weeks. 2 weeks suddenly seemed like an eternity. Clara rose as well, following him to the door where his saddlebags waited. Be careful, she said softly. Noah turned to her, his expression softening in a way she rarely saw. I will. He hesitated, then reached out to touch the chain at her neck, his fingers brushing her skin briefly. Remember what I said, stay close to the house. I promise, Clara said, resisting the unexpected urge to catch his hand in hers. A shout from outside announced that the men were ready. Noah shouldered his saddlebags and stepped onto the porch, Clara following. In the yard, 20 cowboys sat astride their horses, waiting for their boss. Beyond them, the massive herd of cattle was already being moved by the advance riders, the sound of lowing animals and calling men filling the dawn air. Noah swung up onto his black stallion with practiced ease, settling into the saddle and gathering the reins. He looked down at Clara, his face once again the impassive mask she had first seen at their wedding. "Take care of my home, Mrs. Hayes," he said formally, touching the brim of his hat. "And you take care of my husband, Mr. Hayes," she replied, surprising herself with the possessive term. Something like a smile touched his lips before he turned his horse and rode out to join his men, calling orders as he went. Clara stood on the porch watching until the last rider disappeared over the ridge, the dust of 2,000 cattle hanging in the air behind them. Only then did she acknowledge the hollow feeling in her chest and the worry that had taken up residence there. The first week of Noah's absence passed smoothly enough. Clara threw herself into her duties as mistress of Hayes Ranch, organizing a thorough cleaning of the main house, reviewing the accounts as Noah had suggested, and even finding time to start a small kitchen garden closer to the house than the existing one. Wilson, the taciturn foreman who had stayed behind to oversee ranch operations, proved to be respectful and efficient, keeping Clara informed of daily activities without bothering her with unnecessary details. The sheriff rode out twice, as Noah had arranged, reporting no unusual activity in the area. It was on the 8th day that trouble arrived. Clara was in the study, reviewing the correspondence that had come with the weekly mail delivery when she heard the sound of approaching horses. Moving to the window, she saw 3 riders coming up the main road to the ranch, 2 men she didn't recognize flanking a figure she knew all too well, Thomas Blackwell. Her heart began to pound as she watched them dismount in the yard. Thomas looked exactly as she remembered him, handsome in a polished way, with dark hair carefully combed and a smile that had once made her pulse quicken. Now, that same smile sent a chill down her spine. Wilson emerged from the barn, hand resting casually near his holstered gun as he approached the visitors. Clara couldn't hear their exchange, but she saw Thomas gesture toward the main house with an air of entitlement that made her blood boil. Before she could decide what to do, there was a knock at the study door and Mrs. Winters poked her head in, looking flustered. "Mrs. Hayes, there are men asking to see you. One of them claims to be, well, your former fiancé." Clara touched the key that hung beneath her collar, drawing strength from the symbol of Noah's trust. "Please ask Wilson to show them into the parlor, Mrs. Winters. I'll be down momentarily." After the housekeeper left, Clara took a deep breath, smoothing her hair and straightening her simple blue dress. She couldn't refuse to see Thomas without appearing afraid, and she would not give him the satisfaction of thinking he still had any power over her. When she entered the parlor, Thomas was standing by the window, examining the room with proprietary interest. His 2 companions, rough-looking men with the hard eyes of hired guns, lounged near the door. All 3 turned as she appeared. "Clara," Thomas said, his voice as smooth and charming as she remembered, "you're looking well. Marriage agrees with you, apparently." "Mr. Blackwell," she replied coolly, deliberately using his surname. "What brings you to Hayes Ranch? If her formality bothered him, he didn't show it." "I was passing through and thought I should pay my respects to the new Mrs. Hayes." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "After all, we were almost family." "We were nothing of the sort," Clara said firmly. "State your business or leave, Mr. Blackwell. I'm quite busy today." Thomas's smile faded. "Still angry about our little misunderstanding, I see. I had hoped time might have softened your perspective. Stealing my family's savings and abandoning me at the altar is hardly a misunderstanding," Clara replied, her voice steady despite the anger churning inside her. "Now, if you have nothing else to say, actually I do," Thomas cut in, his tone hardening. "I understand your husband is away on a cattle drive, taking the southern route, I hear, quite a deviation from his usual practice." Clara's blood ran cold at the confirmation that Thomas was indeed involved with the rustlers, but she kept her face impassive. "My husband's business decisions are not your concern." Thomas took a step toward her, and Clara had to force herself not to back away. "They became my concern when he interfered in my affairs, taking what was mine." "I was never yours," Clara said quietly, her hand moving to the small derringer she had taken to keeping in her pocket since Noah's departure. And neither was my family's money. Thomas laughed, the sound holding no humor. I wasn't talking about you, Clara, though I must admit you've landed on your feet quite impressively. Hayes Ranch. He looked around the well-appointed room, a significant step up from your father's struggling farm. What do you want, Thomas? Clara demanded, tiring of his games, his expression turned calculating. Information. Hayes changed his cattle drive route at the last minute. I want to know which trail he's taking to Billings, so that was it. Thomas and his rustler friends had planned to ambush the cattle drive on the northern route, only to find their quarry gone. Now they were scrambling to salvage their plan. I have no idea what you're talking about, Clara lied smoothly, and even if I did, I certainly wouldn't tell you. Thomas's handsome face twisted with anger. Don't play games with me, Clara. I know Hayes tells his wife everything. Where is he taking the herd? Mr. Hayes doesn't share his business decisions with me, Clara replied, her hand closing around the derringer in her pocket. Now I think it's time for you to leave. One of Thomas's companions shifted impatiently by the door. This is getting us nowhere, Blackwell. Let's just search the house for the map. Every trail boss keeps maps. Clara's eyes widened slightly. They were right, Noah did keep detailed maps of all the ranch's trails and grazing areas in his study. The very study to which she now held the key, Thomas considered this, eyeing Clara speculatively. Perhaps you're right, Jenkins, he turned back to Clara. Where is Hayes's office? Upstairs. You're not searching anything, Clara said firmly. Wilson, she called, hoping the foreman was still nearby. Thomas moved with unexpected speed, crossing the room and grabbing her arm before she could step away. That wasn't very hospitable, Clara. I thought your mother raised you better than that. Let go of me, Clara said, her voice low and dangerous as she pulled the derringer from her pocket and pressed it against his ribs. Now, Thomas's eyes widened in genuine surprise, then narrowed with calculation. You won't shoot me, Clara. You don't have it in you. Perhaps not, came Wilson's voice from the doorway, where he now stood with his rifle aimed steadily at Thomas's head. But I certainly do, and Mrs. Hayes only needs to say the word. Thomas released Clara's arm slowly, raising his hands in a placating gesture. There's been a misunderstanding. We were just having a friendly conversation. Didn't sound friendly to me, Wilson growled. Mrs. Hayes, what would you like me to do with these? Gentlemen, Clara stepped back, keeping her derringer trained on Thomas. Escort them off the property, Mr. Wilson. And make it clear that they are never to return. Thomas's face darkened with anger. This isn't over, Clara. Hayes has made a powerful enemy. No, Mr. Blackwell, Clara replied steadily. You made an enemy when you chose to target my husband's ranch. Now get out. Wilson gestured with his rifle, and Thomas and his men had no choice but to comply, filing out of the parlor with barely concealed fury. Clara followed at a safe distance, watching from the porch as Wilson marched them to their horses. As Thomas mounted, he looked back at Clara with an expression of pure hatred. Tell Hayes to watch his back. The Blackwell gang isn't finished with him yet. With that parting threat, he wheeled his horse around and galloped away, his companions close behind. Clara's hands were shaking as she lowered the derringer. The Blackwell gang. So Thomas had named his rustler operation after himself. The vanity was so typical of him that she might have laughed if the situation weren't so serious. Are you all right, Mrs. Hayes? Wilson asked, returning to the porch after watching the riders disappear. Yes, thank you, Mr. Wilson, Clara replied, trying to steady her voice. But I'm concerned about my husband. If Mr. Blackwell is determined to find the cattle drive. Wilson's weathered face showed his own worry. The boss planned for this possibility, madam. He left a false trail for anyone following. They won't find him unless they already know the exact route he's taking, Clara nodded, hoping the foreman was right. Nevertheless, I think we should send word. Can one of the men ride to find them? Wilson considered this. It's risky. If Blackwell's men are watching the ranch, they might follow our riders straight to the herd. Then what do we do? Clara asked, frustration evident in her voice. Wilson's expression was grim. We wait, Mrs. Hayes, and we prepare for trouble. The next 6 days were the longest of Clara's life. She insisted on doubling the guard around the ranch, with men posted at all approaches day and night. Wilson taught her to shoot with Noah's rifle, and she practiced until her shoulder ached, determined to be ready if Thomas returned with more men. There was no further sign of the Blackwell gang, but Clara couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Small things, a distant glint of sunlight that might have been a spyglass, hoofprints found on the ridge above the ranch, the nervous behavior of the cattle in the home pasture all suggested that someone was keeping the ranch under observation. On what should have been the 14th day of Noah's absence, the day he had estimated he would return, Clara woke before dawn, hope and anxiety warring in her chest. If all had gone according to plan, the cattle would have reached Billings safely, been sold to the buyers from Chicago, and Noah and his men would be on their way home. But the day passed with no sign of the returning cowboys, and by nightfall, Clara's anxiety had turned to genuine fear. Something had gone wrong. She could feel it. She was standing on the porch, straining her eyes toward the darkening eastern horizon when Wilson approached, his expression carefully neutral. "They could have been delayed in Billings, Mrs. Hayes," he offered. "Business sometimes takes longer than expected. Or they could have been ambushed," Clara said quietly, giving voice to her worst fear. Thomas could have found them after all. Wilson had no answer for that possibility. "I'll send a rider to Billings tomorrow if there's still no word," he promised. "We'll find out what's happened," Clara nodded, too worried to be comforted by the offer. "Thank you, Mr. Wilson." She slept fitfully that night, plagued by nightmares of Noah and his men ambushed in some remote mountain pass, outnumbered and outgunned by Thomas and his gang. When she finally gave up on sleep and rose to watch the sunrise, her eyes were burning with exhaustion and unshed tears. It was mid-morning when she heard at the distant sound of hoofbeats and men's voices. Clara rushed to the front porch, heart pounding, to see a cloud of dust approaching from the east. As it drew closer, she could make out riders, a dozen or more, moving at a steady pace toward the ranch. "Mr. Wilson." She called, not taking her eyes off the approaching group. "Riders coming in," the foreman emerged from the barn, shading his eyes against the sun as he peered at the distant figures. After a moment, his tense posture relaxed. "It's them," he confirmed, a rare smile breaking across his weathered face. "That's the boss's stallion in the lead." Relief flooded through Clara with such force that she had to grip the porch railing to steady herself. They were safe. Noah was safe. As the riders drew closer, Clara could see that there were fewer men than had left, perhaps 15 instead of 20. Her relief gave way to renewed concern as she counted heads, trying to determine who was missing. Noah rode at the front, his tall figure unmistakable even at a distance. As they entered the yard, Clara could see that he looked exhausted, his clothes dusty and his face showing several days' growth of beard. But he was whole and upright in the saddle, and the sight of him sent a wave of emotion through her that was too complex to name. The men dismounted wearily, stable boys rushing forward to take their horses. Noah handed his reins to one of them, saying something too low for Clara to hear before turning toward the house. When he saw her standing on the porch, he paused, and even across the yard, she could feel the intensity of his gaze. Clara started forward without conscious thought, moving down the steps and across the dusty yard with quick steps. Noah met her halfway, stopping just short of reaching for her. "Clara," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion, "you're safe." She almost laughed at the irony that his first concern would be for her when she had spent days fearing for him. "Yes, and you're late." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "We had some trouble on the trail." Now that she was closer, Clara could see a dark stain on his shirt sleeve that might have been blood and a fresh cut along his jawline. "Thomas," she asked quietly. Noah's expression hardened. "So he did come here." 3 days after you left," Clara confirmed. "He wanted to know which route you had taken." Noah's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Did he threaten you?" "He tried," Clara said simply. "Mr. Wilson and I convinced him it was unwise to continue doing so." Something like pride flickered in Noah's eyes. "I want to hear everything, but first I need to see to the men." We lost 2 good cowboys in an ambush 4 days ago, and 3 others are wounded. Clara's heart sank at the confirmation of her fears. I'll have Mrs. Winters prepare food and the doctor sent for. You look like you could use both yourself. Noah nodded gratefully. Thank you. I'll join you in the house as soon as I can. It was well past midnight when Noah finally came to the study where Clara waited, the room lit only by a single lamp and the dying fire in the grate. He had bathed and changed into clean clothes, but exhaustion still lined his face, and the cut on his jaw stood out starkly against his tanned skin. You should be sleeping, he said, echoing words he had spoken to her before his departure. So should you, Clara replied, gesturing to the chair across from hers. But I thought you might want this first. She pushed a glass of whiskey toward him, and Noah accepted it with a grateful nod, sinking into the chair with a barely suppressed groan. The doctor says Jenkins and Martinez will recover, Clara told him. Though Jenkins may lose the use of his left arm, I know, I spoke with them before coming in. Noah took a long swallow of whiskey, then set the glass aside. Now tell me what happened here. Clara recounted Thomas's visit in detail, including his threat and self-identification as the leader of the Blackwell gang. Noah listened without interruption, his expression growing darker with each revelation. You handled it perfectly, he said when she had finished. Though I wish you hadn't been put in that position at all. How did he find you? Clara asked. Mr. Wilson said you left a false trail. Noah's mouth twisted grimly. We did, but Blackwell had more men than we anticipated. They split up, following every possible route until they found our trail in Reynolds Valley. He paused, taking another drink. They ambushed us near Hawks Ridge, firing from the rocks above the trail. We lost Cooper and Johnson in the first volley. Clara closed her eyes briefly, thinking of the 2 young cowboys who would never return to Hayes Ranch. I'm so sorry, Noah. We fought them off and made it to Billings with most of the herd intact, Noah continued, but it was clear Blackwell wasn't just after cattle, he wanted blood. Because of me, Clara said softly, the guilt she had been carrying for days finally finding voice. Because you married me instead of letting him humiliate me. Noah leaned forward, his blue eyes intense in the lamplight. No. Because I interfered with his plans to use your father's farm as a base for his rustling operation. Because I've built something he covets and can't have. He paused. And yes, perhaps because you chose me over him, even if it wasn't a real choice. Clara's breath caught at his words. It was a real choice, she said quietly. I could have refused your offer at the altar. I didn't. Something flickered in Noah's eyes, surprise perhaps, or something warmer. No, you didn't. He seemed about to say more, but then grimaced slightly, his hand moving to his side. You're hurt, Clara realized, noting the careful way he held himself. Not just the cut on your face, it's nothing, Noah dismissed. A bullet grazed my ribs during the ambush. The doctor already looked at it. Clara studied his face, seeing the lines of pain he was trying to hide. You should rest. We can discuss what to do about Thomas tomorrow. Noah nodded, finishing his whiskey and standing with careful movements. I am tired, he admitted, but Clara, I'm glad to be home. The simple statement warmed her more than it should have. I'm glad you're home too, she replied softly. For a moment, they stood looking at each other in the dim light, something unspoken passing between them. Then Noah inclined his head slightly and moved toward the door. Noah, Clara called as he reached the threshold. I've been sleeping with your rifle since Thomas's visit. Would you like it back now that you're home? A smile touched his lips, a real smile that transformed his weary face. Keep it, he said. It suits you. With that, he was gone, leaving Clara to ponder the strange twist her life had taken, from jilted bride to armed defender of Hayes Ranch in less than a month. The next morning, Clara woke to the unfamiliar sound of hammering and men's voices outside her window. Dressing quickly, she went downstairs to find the house uncharacteristically empty, with no sign of Mrs. Winters or the kitchen staff. Following the sounds of activity, Clara stepped onto the front porch to discover the ranch yard transformed into a hive of activity. Cowboys who should have been resting after their arduous journey were instead building what appeared to be defensive positions around the perimeter of the main compound. Others were moving cattle from the outlying pastures into the protected areas closer to the ranch buildings. Noah stood in the center of it all, issuing orders and inspecting the work with critical eyes. When he saw Clara, he crossed to the porch, his movements still careful but his face more rested than it had been the night before. "I'm sorry for the noise," he said by way of greeting. "But we need to be prepared." The sheriff rode out at first light with news that Blackwell and his gang were seen near Coopersville yesterday, moving west, toward us. Clara's stomach clenched with apprehension. "How many men does he have?" "At least 20, according to the sheriff, possibly more." Noah's expression was grim. "I've sent riders to the neighboring ranches for help, but we can't count on them arriving in time." Clara looked at the preparations underway with new understanding. "You think they'll attack the ranch directly?" It wasn't a question, but Noah nodded anyway. "Blackwell lost men and failed to get the herd. His reputation is at stake now. He'll want to make a statement." Clara thought of Thomas's face when she had refused to give him information, the cold hatred in his eyes as he had threatened Noah. "What can I do to help?" Noah seemed surprised by the question, then pleased. "Mrs. Winters is organizing supplies in the root cellar. It's the safest place if shooting starts. You could help her inventory what we have and what we need." Clara nodded, already making mental calculations. "I'll see to it immediately." "And Noah, thank you for not suggesting I hide in my room while men handle this." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "After the way you dealt with Blackwell, I wouldn't dare." Throughout the day, the ranch transformed into a fortified compound. Hay bales were stacked to create barriers. Wagons were positioned to block direct approaches to the main house. And the bunkhouse was converted into a makeshift infirmary for the wounded men, with additional medical supplies brought up from town by a deputy who came to assist. By nightfall, everyone was on edge, jumping at small sounds and peering nervously into the darkness beyond the ranch yard. Noah organized the men into watches, positioning lookouts at every approach. Clara made sure food was available at all hours for the men coming on and off duty, working alongside Mrs. Winters until the older woman insisted she rest. "You're dead on your feet, Mrs. Hayes," the housekeeper scolded gently. "And no good to anyone if you collapse. Go sit with the boss for a while. He could use the company, I expect." Clara found Noah in his study, poring over maps of the ranch and surrounding terrain by lamplight. He looked up as she entered, the tension in his face easing slightly at the sight of her. "Mrs. Winters sent me to rest," Clara explained, taking the chair across from him. "Though I'm not sure sitting here worrying is restful." Noah's mouth quirked in acknowledgement. "Probably not, but I appreciate the company nonetheless." Clara studied the map spread across his desk. "You're planning defensive positions and escape routes if it comes to that," Noah confirmed. "I won't risk the lives of everyone on this ranch if the situation becomes untenable." "You think it might?" Clara asked, a chill running through her at the possibility. Noah was silent for a moment, clearly weighing how much to tell her. "Blackwell has numbers on his side," he finally said, "and he's desperate. That makes him dangerous." "But this is your home," Clara said softly. "Everything you've built." "It's just land and buildings," Noah replied, his blue eyes meeting hers steadily. "The people are what matter." The simplicity and sincerity of his statement touched something deep within Clara. This man, who had married her on a moment's notice to save her from humiliation, who had put himself at risk to protect his workers, who now prepared to defend his home against overwhelming odds, he was unlike anyone she had ever known. "Noah," she began, not entirely sure what she wanted to say, only that something needed to be expressed. A sudden commotion outside interrupted her. Shouts rang out, followed by the pounding of footsteps on the porch. Noah was on his feet instantly, moving to the door as Wilson burst in without knocking. "Riders approaching from the north, boss," the foreman reported tersely. "At least a dozen, moving fast." Noah grabbed his gun belt from a hook by the door, buckling it on with practiced movements. "Get the women to the cellar. Position the men as we discussed." Wilson nodded, already turning to go, but Clara stood her ground. "I'm not hiding in the cellar, Noah." Both men looked at her in surprise. Noah recovered first, his expression hardening. This isn't the time for debate, Clara. Blackwell and his men will be shooting to kill. I can shoot too, Clara reminded him. You said yourself that I handled the rifle well. This is different, Noah insisted. These aren't targets on fence posts. Clara moved to the cabinet where she knew he kept spare ammunition, opening it with steady hands. They're men who want to hurt the people I care about. That makes them targets enough for me. Noah and Wilson exchanged a look that Clara couldn't interpret. Then Noah sighed, a sound of resignation mixed with something that might have been pride. Wilson, get Mrs. Winters and the other women to the cellar. Tell Martinez to give Mrs. Hayes his position at the second-floor window. He's in no condition to shoot anyway. The foreman hesitated only briefly before nodding and hurrying out. Noah turned to Clara, his expression more serious than she had ever seen it. If I give you a position, you follow orders exactly. No heroics. If I tell you to retreat, you retreat. Understood? Clara nodded, trying to ignore the fear building in her chest. Understood. Noah studied her face for a moment longer, then moved to the gun cabinet and took out his best rifle, checking it before handing it to her. You'll have better coverage from the upstairs window. It overlooks the main approach. Don't fire until I give the signal and make every shot count. Clara accepted the rifle, feeling its weight and responsibility. I will. Noah hesitated, then reached out to touch her cheek briefly, the gesture so unexpected that Clara's breath caught. Be careful, he said simply. You too, she replied, suddenly afraid this might be the last quiet moment they would share. With that, they separated Noah to organize the defense of the ranch yard, Clara to her position at the upstairs window, where she could see the approaching riders now, dark silhouettes against the moonlit prairie. The battle for Hayes Ranch began just before midnight. Thomas and his men approached boldly, making no attempt at stealth. They spread out along the ridge overlooking the ranch, clearly visible in the moonlight, before Thomas rode forward alone, stopping just out of rifle range. Hayes, he shouted, his voice carrying clearly in the still night air. Come out and face me like a man. From her position at the window, Clara could see Noah step into the yard, rifle in hand but pointed at the ground. I'm here, Blackwell. State your business and be gone. Thomas laughed, the sound ugly in the darkness. My business is simple. You've taken something that belongs to me. I've come to reclaim it. Nothing here belongs to you, Noah replied steadily. Ride away while you still can. I'll take the woman and 50 head of cattle as compensation for my troubles, Thomas called back. Do that, and I'll leave the rest of your ranch standing. Clara's hands tightened on her rifle at his words. The audacity of the man to think he could claim her like property after everything he had done, Noah's response was immediate and unequivocal. My wife stays where she is. As for the cattle, you're welcome to try taking them, but I guarantee it will be the last mistake you make. A murmur ran through Thomas's men at Noah's defiance. Thomas himself stiffened in the saddle, clearly not having expected such a direct refusal. You're outnumbered, Hayes, he shouted, anger evident in his voice. Be reasonable. Last chance, Blackwell, Noah called back. Ride away now or face the consequences. Thomas's response was to draw his gun and fire a shot that kicked up dust at Noah's feet. In an instant, the night erupted into chaos as both sides opened fire. Clara steadied her rifle against the window frame, focusing on the riders who were now charging toward the ranch buildings. Noah had disappeared from her view, presumably taking cover behind the barricades in the yard. Gunfire flashed from multiple positions around the ranch as Noah's men engaged the attackers. Taking a deep breath, Clara sighted on a rider approaching the main gate and squeezed the trigger. The rifle's recoil slammed into her shoulder, but she saw the man tumble from his saddle. There was no time to think about what she had just done. Another rider was already taking his place. For what seemed like hours but was probably only minutes, Clara fired methodically from her position, targeting riders who came too close to the defensive positions where she knew Noah's men were stationed. The smell of gunpowder filled the room and the rifle grew hot in her hands, but she kept firing, kept reloading, aware that lives depended on her accuracy. Below, the battle raged across the ranch yard. Clara caught glimpses of Noah moving between positions, directing his men, firing with deadly precision when necessary. Despite being outnumbered, the defenders of Hayes Ranch held their ground, the attackers finding it difficult to advance against the well-prepared defenses. Then Clara saw something that made her blood run cold. Thomas, who had remained at the back of his men during the initial assault, was now making his way around the perimeter of the fight, heading toward the back of the house toward the undefended kitchen entrance that Clara knew was locked but not barricaded. Without hesitation, Clara abandoned her position at the front window, grabbing spare ammunition as she ran for the back stairs that led directly to the kitchen. She had just reached the bottom step when she heard glass breaking Thomas forcing his way in through the kitchen window. Clara pressed herself against the wall beside the door that separated the stairwell from the kitchen, rifle ready. She could hear Thomas moving around, the sound of drawers being opened and closed as if he was looking for something specific. Taking a deep breath, Clara stepped through the doorway, rifle aimed. "That's far enough, Thomas." He whirled around, gun in hand, but froze when he saw the rifle pointed at his chest. For a moment, they stared at each other across the kitchen, the man who had abandoned her at the altar, and the woman who had found unexpected strength in the aftermath. "Clara," Thomas said, his charming smile sliding into place despite the situation. "I've come to rescue you. Rescue me." Clara repeated incredulously. "From what, exactly?" "From this sham of a marriage," Thomas replied, as if it were obvious. "I know Hayes forced you into it, used your family's situation to his advantage." Clara kept the rifle steady, her finger on the trigger. "The only person who tried to take advantage of my family was you, Thomas. You stole our savings and left me humiliated in front of the entire town." Thomas had the audacity to look wounded. "That was a misunderstanding. I needed that money for an investment opportunity. I always intended to pay it back with interest." "After you used my father's farm to rustle cattle," Clara asked coldly. "After you murdered innocent men on the trail to Billings," something ugly flashed across Thomas's handsome face. "Business is business, Clara. Hayes should have stayed out of my way." "Put the gun down, Thomas," Clara ordered, refusing to be drawn into his twisted justifications. "It's over." Thomas's expression hardened. "It's not over until I say it's over. I came for you and I'm not leaving without you." "Yes, you are," came Noah's voice from the doorway behind Clara. "One way or another." Clara didn't turn, keeping her rifle trained on Thomas, but she felt a wave of relief at Noah's presence. Thomas's eyes darted between them, calculating his options. "She doesn't love you, Hayes," Thomas said, a desperate edge to his voice. "She agreed to marry you to save her family's reputation, that's all." "That may be true," Noah replied evenly, "but she chose me nonetheless, and I chose her." He moved to stand beside Clara, his own gun aimed at Thomas. "Now drop your weapon, or I'll let my wife demonstrate how well I've taught her to shoot." For a moment, Clara thought Thomas might actually comply. His hand wavered and the confidence in his expression faltered. Then, with a sudden movement, he raised his gun toward Noah. Clara fired without hesitation, the sound deafening in the confined space of the kitchen. Thomas staggered backward, a look of shock on his face as he looked down at the spreading stain on his chest. His gun clattered to the floor as he collapsed against the kitchen table, knocking dishes to the ground with a crash. "You shot me," he gasped, disbelief in his eyes as he looked at Clara. "You gave me no choice," Clara replied, her voice steadier than she felt. Thomas's gaze moved from Clara to Noah and back again, comprehension and something like bitter amusement crossing his face. "I see it now," he mumbled, blood bubbling at the corner of his mouth. "You really did choose him." With those words, Thomas Blackwell slumped to the floor, his eyes staring sightlessly at the ceiling. Clara lowered her rifle slowly, a tremor finally working its way through her body as the reality of what she had done sank in. Noah gently took the weapon from her hands, setting it aside before turning her to face him. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his eyes scanning her for injuries. Clara shook her head, unable to find words as shock began to set in. Noah pulled her against his chest, his arms encircling her protectively as the sounds of gunfire outside began to diminish. "It's over," he murmured against her hair. "Blackwell's men are retreating. You're safe now." Clara nodded against his chest, drawing strength from his solid presence. After a moment, she pulled back slightly to look up at him. "I killed him," she said simply. Noah's expression was solemn but without judgment. "You protected your home and the people in it, including me, home." The word resonated within Clara as she looked around the kitchen, the heart of the house she had come to know so well over the past month. This was her home now, and the man holding her was her husband, not just in name but in all the ways that truly mattered. "Yes," she agreed softly. "I did." The aftermath of what came to be known as the Battle of Hayes Ranch unfolded over the following days and weeks. The sheriff arrived with reinforcements the morning after the fight, having been alerted by the neighboring ranchers who had received Noah's call for help too late to join the defense. 3 of Thomas's men had been killed in the battle, including Thomas himself. The rest had fled when their leader failed to return, scattering across the territory. The sheriff organized posses to track them down, eventually capturing most of the Blackwell gang and putting an end to their rustling operation. Hayes Ranch had not emerged unscathed. One of Noah's men had been killed defending the North Corral, and several others were wounded. Buildings had been damaged by gunfire, fences broken, and livestock scattered. But the core of the ranch remained intact, and the community rallied around, neighboring ranchers sending men to help with repairs, and women bringing food for the workers. Through it all, Clara worked alongside Noah, organizing the cleanup, caring for the wounded, and gradually restoring order to their home. The experience had changed her in ways she was still discovering, hardened her in some respects, opened her heart in others. It had changed things between her and Noah as well. The careful distance he had maintained since their wedding had given way to something warmer, more intimate, though still restrained. They worked together as true partners now, consulting each other on decisions, sharing meals with genuine conversation rather than polite small talk, occasionally catching each other's gaze with a look that contained more than either was ready to express in words. 3 weeks after the battle, Clara was in the garden, harvesting the first tender vegetables of early summer when she heard Noah's approaching footsteps. Looking up, she saw him carrying a small wooden box, his expression both nervous and determined. "Clara," he said, stopping a few feet away. "Do you have a moment?" She set down her basket, brushing soil from her hands. "Of course." Noah seemed uncharacteristically uncertain, shifting the box from one hand to the other before finally extending it to her. "I have something for you, something I should have given you weeks ago." Clara accepted the box with curious fingers, opening it to reveal a beautiful gold wedding band, more elaborate than the simple ring he had placed on her finger at their hasty ceremony. Tiny flowers were engraved around the circumference, catching the sunlight with delicate brilliance. "Noah," she breathed, touched by the unexpected gift, "it's beautiful." "It was my mother's," he explained, watching her reaction carefully. "I've had it in my desk since our wedding day, but the timing never seemed right." Clara looked up at him, confused. "I don't understand." "You already gave me a wedding ring." Noah took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. "The ring I gave you at the church was one I borrowed from Mrs. Johnson, the Reverend's wife. I had nothing prepared because I hadn't planned to propose marriage that day." Clara touched the simple band she had worn for the past month, understanding now why it had never quite fit properly. "Why are you giving me this now?" Noah took another step closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of darker blue in his eyes. "Because what began as a business arrangement, a marriage of convenience, has become something else entirely. At least for me." Clara's heart quickened at his words, at the vulnerability she saw in his face, a vulnerability this strong, capable man rarely allowed anyone to see. "What has it become, Noah?" she asked softly. Needing to hear him say it, he reached out, taking her free hand in his. "I find myself in the unexpected position of having fallen in love with my wife," he said simply. "And I wanted to give her a ring that represents not a hasty bargain made at an altar, but a true marriage built on respect, admiration, and deep affection." Clara felt tears gathering in her eyes, tears of joy and relief and 100 other emotions she couldn't name. "When?" she whispered. "When did you know?" Noah's thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand. "I think I began falling in love with you the moment you stood at that altar, devastated but unbowed, refusing to collapse under the weight of what had happened. But I knew for certain when I returned from the cattle drive and saw you standing on that porch, waiting for me. It felt like coming home in a way this ranch never had before." Clara blinked back her tears, a smile breaking across her face. "I've been so afraid to acknowledge what I was feeling," she admitted. "Afraid that I was just transferring my feelings for Thomas to you, or that I was mistaking gratitude for something deeper." "And now?" Noah asked, hope and uncertainty mingled in his expression. Clara set the box aside carefully, then stepped forward to place her hands on his chest, feeling the strong, steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. "Now I know the difference between infatuation and love, between obligation and choice." She looked up into his eyes, letting him see everything she felt. "I choose you, Noah Hayes. Not because you rescued me from humiliation or protected my family, but because you are a good, honorable man who treats me as an equal and makes me feel both safe and strong at the same time." The smile that broke across Noah's face transformed him, erasing the last vestiges of the guarded man who had offered her his hand at the altar that day. He cupped her face gently between his palms. "May I kiss my wife properly at last?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. Clara's answer was to rise on her toes, meeting him halfway as his lips found hers in a kiss that began tenderly, but quickly deepened into something that expressed all the longing and love that had been building between them for weeks. When they finally parted, both breathless, Noah rested his forehead against hers. "I should have done that much sooner," he murmured. Clara laughed softly. "We have time to make up for it now." Noah stepped back slightly, taking the new ring from its box. With gentle fingers, he removed the borrowed band from her finger and replaced it with his mother's ring. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her hand alone. "Clara Hayes," he said formally, though his eyes danced with joy. "Will you continue to be my wife, not out of obligation or necessity, but because you choose to be?" "I will," Clara replied without hesitation. "Today and all the days to come." As the summer sun warmed the garden around them, Noah kissed her again, sealing their renewed vows with a promise that needed no words. What had begun as a desperate bargain at an altar, with a cowboy's outstretched hand offering salvation from humiliation, had transformed into something neither could have anticipated: a love as vast and enduring as the Montana sky above them. 5 years later, Clara stood on the porch of Hayes Ranch, watching as Noah lifted their 3-year-old daughter onto her first pony, his hands steady and sure as he adjusted the tiny saddle. Beside them, their 5-year-old son was already mounted on his own small horse, sitting tall with the same natural confidence his father displayed in the saddle. "Not too fast, Nathan," Clara called, instinctively protective even though she knew Noah would never let either child come to harm. Noah glanced up with a smile that still made her heart skip a beat. "He's a Hayes, Clara, born to ride fast." "Well, this Hayes would prefer her children return with all limbs intact," Clara replied, though she couldn't help smiling at the joy on her children's faces. So much had changed in 5 years. Hayes Ranch had expanded, now encompassing not only Clara's father's former farm but additional grazing land to the south and east. The ranch house had been enlarged to accommodate their growing family, with a new wing that included a proper nursery and playroom. The Blackwell gang had passed into local legend, occasionally mentioned around campfires but no longer a threat to anyone. Most of its members were serving long sentences in territorial prisons, their rustling days long behind them. Clara's parents had moved into a comfortable cottage on the ranch property 3 years ago, her father helping oversee the farm operations while her mother doted on her grandchildren. The arrangement had brought all of them closer, healing old wounds and creating new bonds. As Clara watched Noah lead the children in a careful circle around the corral, their laughter floating back to her on the summer breeze, She thought about the strange twist of fate that had brought her here. Thomas's betrayal, which had seemed like the end of her world at the time, had actually been the beginning of a far better life than she could have imagined. Noah looked up again, catching her eye with a smile that held all the warmth and love that had grown between them over the years. In that moment, Clara knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right choice that day at the altar, when she had placed her trembling hand in Noah's steady one and taken a leap of faith into the unknown. Some might call it luck or fate or divine intervention. But Clara knew it for what it was: the moment she had stopped being a victim of circumstance and started becoming the architect of her own happiness. And as her family rode toward her in the golden light of the Montana afternoon, Clara Hayes stepped off the porch to meet them, her heart full and her future secure in the love they had built together, one day at a time.